Hi, I'm Dr. Jacque and we're going to look at probiotics today. When you walk into some stores, you might notice there's rows and rows of supplements of probiotics, and they might say there's 10,000 probiotics in this one, there's 20,000 probiotics in this one, maybe it gets up to 50,000 in this one, and you wonder, okay, probiotics must be the thing. What is the deal, and do I need one of these boxes? Well, the interesting thing about it is like you've come today to listen to this video, and you might have even brought a friend with you, but you might not realize you brought millions of friends with you. And that's the probiotics that are in your gut. The interesting thing about probiotics is that they're with us all the time. And there are some things like antibiotics and processed foods and things like that that decrease the probiotics in your system. But for the most part, we have a microbiome that's unique to each one of us. And in order to keep that microbiome healthy, you need two things. One of the most important things are the prebiotics. The prebiotics are food for the probiotics to work on. So these prebiotics, they're things like greens and grains and beans and any kind of fiber. And the prebiotics are the things that break those down. What's interesting about prebiotics is it's in food all around us, and we're going to look at some different foods today that have probiotics in it, like if you like pickles from the refrigerated section, or sauerkraut that's in the refrigerated section of your grocery store, or any fermented foods, they're all going to have probiotics in it. One place that you might not realize is sourdough bread also has probiotics. And I love using a wild yeast. I captured this wild yeast just from the air in my kitchen. So I mixed flour and water together, and I inoculated it with just a little bit of wild yeast that was taken from a friend's starter. Actually, it was my sister's starter, and her starter claims that it's from the 1884 Oregon Trail days. And it really is possible that it's come from there. There are some cultures where they hand their starters down from generation to generation. I know I was talking to my daughter-in-law, whose family owns a cheese factory, and her grandmother, they used to make their own culture, and they would keep their culture in a jar on the kitchen counter in order to be able to make their cheeses. And they would have a special culture that would be distinct and different from everyone else's. And that culture has to be kept just exactly like my sourdough starter, which is also a culture, and also both of them are full of probiotics. And today, those cheeses are made with a culture that they purchase. And so the probiotics come from that kind of a culture rather than the one I'm talking about here for my sourdough. But this sourdough is 100% wild yeast. It has flour and water, and because it's alive, I have to feed it. And so today, to make sourdough, I'm going to take approximately a cup of sourdough in my bowl, and then my sourdough starter, I only have this much left. So what I'm going to have to do is add flour to it, and I'm going to also add water and stir it up. And when I stir it, I am then going to give it time to grow. And I like to give it probably about 8 hours to grow before I make some starter again. But often my jar will I'll have a lot of starter in it. So I can make pancakes, I can make waffles, I can make all kinds of different ingredients with it, but my favorite is sourdough bread. So my starter is probably about this level. And when it doubles, I know it's growing well and it's doing well and it's ready to make more bread. If you're really precise, a perfectionist, you could put a rubber band on this jar right where the level of the sourdough is, and you'll be able to see when it doubles. I did this science experiment with my grandchildren, and it was really, they were thrilled to see that the sourdough had doubled in size, and then we had the rubber band to prove where it had started at. So today, I'm going to do bread with different kinds of grains. I have wheat flour, I have some spelt flour I want to add to it. I can also add a little white flour that has a little bit of more gluten formation so that it'll rise a little better. I like to add a potato to my breads, and I don't always add this to it, but it's a good idea because I saw in America's Test Kitchen that the more potato that they added, the lighter and fluffier the bread became. And so I have a whole potato here. You saw me stabbing it with a knife. That's just to prick it to allow steam to release from it. And I'm going to give this to Ashley and have her put it in the microwave. But we don't have to cook that right now because I have some in a bowl here. And I'm just going to add that to the flour. I have different kinds of grains that I like to add to it, and other things that when I add those whole grains to it, there's a little bit of problem with the bread rising because the little edges of the wheat are sharp and they cut the strands of gluten and keep it from rising as well. So if I add some non-fat dry milk to it, I find that I have a lighter product. So some of the grains that we might add, of course, we have 100% whole wheat flour. And this is my favorite flour. My husband was driving across Montana, and it was in an area where there's nothing but wheat fields. And all of a sudden he saw this place called Wheat, Montana. And he stopped and he says, oh, I have to show Jackie. She is going to love this place. And it's so much fun to find the wheat fields right there, and they mill the wheat, and it's has a wonderful flavor. And different wheats have different flavors. So if you have white wheat, that's going to be a little bit different than red wheat. This is a red winter wheat, and it's really good for baking bread. Different places, including Wheat, Montana, also sells the wheat berries. And I have a wheat grinder back here, and I put the wheat berries in the top and turn it on, and flour comes out. On the other side, I can use oat groats or just about any other kind of grain. I turn it on and it makes a rolled oat. And it's slightly different than the Quaker oats you might buy in the grocery store because these are even less processed than those. They're not steamed, and there's some other differences because basically this is an oatmeal where just the oat groat itself is flattened and rolled. But I'm going to add it to my bread. I can also buy a 7-grain cereal. I could add flax by itself and barley and spelt and all these different grains, or I can just buy a cereal and add it just like it is. And so this is rolled wheat, rolled spelt, has some flax in it, rye, triticale, barley, has a lot of different grains. And I keep all those in my pantry anyway, but if you don't, an easy way to get those is from a whole grain cereal. And there's a lot of different brands. This again is Wheat, Montana, which you can find in most grocery stores. The flour is a little easier to find. I know I've seen it in Walmart, and I believe I've seen it in several other grocery stores around here. And if you're ever up in Montana, you can for sure stop by their facility where they grind the wheat. And I just think it's fascinating that way. So we have our grains, and I'm going to add about 1.5 teaspoons of salt for 3 cups of grains. And I have melted butter. The interesting thing about bread is that melted butter gives it a better flavor, and it gives a better consistency than if you put the butter in cold. So I just melt it in the microwave for about a minute until it's softened. And I'm going to add my water to the mixture. And it's really interesting when you're making bread because it really depends on the humidity in your kitchen. Because if it's a high humidity, the flour absorbs that moisture, and you need less moisture than in your bread. But if it's a drier day, or if it's inside and you keep it air conditioned all the time, which makes the air a little drier, then you don't need as much flour. So here I have my dough, and I'm going to add just enough flour to keep it very soft and very, very light. And I want to be able to handle it and not have it too sticky. So that's why I keep adding just slightly more flour. And now I'm ready to knead this dough. And kneading doesn't have to be a very technical type of thing. It can be just as simple as folding and turning the dough, which is what I'm going to do. And so I take it and I fold it over on itself and turn. Fold, turn, fold, turn, fold, turn. And I might do this for 8 to 10 minutes. If I want to put it in my mixer, it would take 2 to 3 minutes. If you want to do it in a bread machine, that works too. So I keep folding it, and as you can see, I've only folded it maybe 10 times, but it's already a little bit softer and a really nice consistency. Well, I would continue to knead that for 8 to 10 minutes. And so here I have my dough, and you can see, wow, that looks very different than this. The only difference is that this dough was kneaded for 8 to 10 minutes, and then it was given time to rise. Now, sourdough is probably going to take 4, 6, 8 hours to rise. And you know, last night, I was planning to do this, take this bread before I went to bed, shape it, and then let it rise overnight. I forgot about it. We went out to dinner and I got home and I forgot that I had started my sourdough bread. So this sourdough bread, it rose from the time I got home from work through the night, and I got up early this morning, and then when I remembered it, I went ahead and baked it. And the amazing thing is, it turned out perfect. It turned out wonderful. So sourdough is really forgiving. I work full time, and so I might mix together the dough. It takes me about 3 minutes before I go to work. Let it rise all day. When I get home, I might shape it and then put it in in a warm place to rise. If you have a long time for it to rise, like I forgot it overnight, it was probably 15 hours, a cooler place is best because the yeast is going to go very slowly. But you could also do it in a very warm place, like sometimes I put it out on my porch and it's probably 85 degrees some days. And at that temperature, sometimes it rises in about 4 hours. This rose in approximately 4 hours. Now, there's so many wonderful things that I can do with this sourdough bread, but one of my favorites is to make a cherry walnut bread. So here I have cherries and I have walnuts to add to it. Now, I love walnuts added to my bread, but if you've ever tried it, it can turn your dough just a little bit purplish. And it's an enzyme that's on the walnuts, and that purplish color makes it really unattractive. But what I found is if I chop my walnuts, add a tiny touch of oil, put it in the microwave for 1 to 1.5 minutes to toast the walnuts, I find that it doesn't turn my bread purple anymore. You can also do that on top of the stove, or you could do it in the oven. Any way that you toast the walnuts is going to make it so that it's just perfect to do our bread in. I have a bread pan right there, Ashley. Do you want to hand that pan to me right here by the potato? Right, this one. And can make all different shapes of bread. I use this particular pan because it makes a long baguette shape, and that's kind of nice to serve or to make sandwiches out of, etc. And I just lay the dough in there. Another way that I do often do my bread is I will take a bowl like this and allow the dough to rise. And I use parchment paper. So first of all, I'm going to work this dough, and I'm going to try and form kind of a tension on the top of the dough. And this is going to help the gluten be contained in the dough and create a really nice loaf. So my loaf is ready right there. And after it rises, I have this one has risen. And this loaf, I added whole wheat berries to it. The whole wheat berries were put in boiling water just to cover for about 3 hours. And it was given time for the berries to soften. And so that's ready to cook. I have a really special way that I like to cook my bread, and I use a cast iron pan. Any cast iron Dutch oven will work. And I take this cast iron pan, I put it in the oven at 500 degrees for like 30 to 40 minutes. I keep a thermometer in my oven so I can check and make sure that that oven gets up to 500 degrees and that I'm sure this is really, really hot. And when it's hot, you have to be really careful to handle it. But I leave it in the oven, and it's incredibly hot, and the lid is also heated in the oven, and I am going to lift my bread out of the dish that I let it rise in, and I put it in there, and instantly we are going to have a little bit of a rise in that bread because it's so hot. I'm going to take a knife or a lame, and I'm going to squeeze the bread on the top, and I'm working really quickly because then I want to take it and I'm going to put the lid on it, and this goes in the oven. When I'm doing this in front of the oven, I don't even take this pan out of the oven. I just real carefully try to slip the bread into it. So that bread is, I have 3 loaves here that I've baked. This is a sourdough loaf that I actually forgot about overnight, and it just came out really, really beautiful. This is a loaf of cherry walnut, and this is one that has very minor additions. It's more of a sandwich type of bread. But let me slice my sourdough loaf. And you see that it has the big holes characteristic of sourdough. And what I like about it is it has pieces of the wheat. And I'm from a wheat farm, so I'm really crazy about having wheat in my bread, not just the whole wheat flour, which is really healthy with lots of fiber, but also the whole grain. So that gives you an idea of something that is fun to make with probiotics. You might find that the sourdough in the grocery store hasn't got real sourdough in it. It might just have a flavoring. But if you go to a bakery and it's taken them 24 hours to make their loaf of sourdough bread, you can be assured that it will have probiotics in it. Another nice thing about the probiotics is that the acid in the sourdough and the culture of bacteria, they work on the gluten in the bread as it's rising. And so the bread might take 24 hours to rise, and during that time, the probiotics are working on the gluten, lessening the effects. So people who are sensitive to gluten can often eat sourdough bread because the probiotics have done the work for it. After you bake the bread, the probiotics aren't necessarily available to your system, depending upon the temperature of the internal temperature of the bread, but the probiotics have done their work on the sourdough bread. So when you're cooking this bread, you take the covered container, you put it in the oven. You're going to cook it at, turn the temperature down to about 425 degrees for 15 minutes. Take the lid off, continue cooking for another 15 minutes, and then you're going to have a golden brown loaf. I like to take an internal temperature and make sure that my whole wheat bread has gotten to about anywhere from 198 degrees to about 200 degrees. I find is a really nice soft crumb. So thank you so much, and we're going to be talking more about probiotics and all the different foods that contain probiotics. So stay tuned, and we are going to look at fermented lemons. We're going to look at some kimchi and some other ingredients. So thank you.